Hello. Thank you for making the choice to join us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. My name is Jeremy Houck. Before we get into our text this morning, I want to take you back to an Old Testament text. In this text, we discover that the nation of Israel they're in a time of mourning. Over the last few years, they've drifted from God following the lead of their king, Saul. God takes his spirit and his blessing away from Saul and the nation. And then he has his prophet Samuel go out and anoint this young shepherd boy from the line of Jesse to be the next king. But David, that shepherd boy, has to wait. There's no royal coronation, no parade, no celebration, just waiting for the time that he assumes the throne. Anointing David is actually one of the last things that Samuel does before he dies, but he also censures King Saul, who's still very much alive, still holding on to power, and willing to do whatever he has to do to keep his throne, even if that means killing David. For the next 4 years, David and his supporters live life on the run. They hide out in caves. They even move in with the Philistines for a little while, and at other times they work as paid muscle for those who need a little protection. When we get to this text in 1 Samuel 25, we discover life hasn't really been easy for the next anointed king of Israel. Forced into hiding, David and his loyal soldiers are running low on supplies, and they're getting kind of desperate. While David is living on the run, there's this other man living in Maon who has amassed a fortune. The Bible says he has 1,000 goats, 3,000 sheep, an incredibly successful business, a beautiful wife. Nabal has it all, but these blessings don't seem to do much to affect his mood, his generosity. Our text describes him as crude and mean in all of his dealings. So it's the time of the year when they sheared the sheep. From other Old Testament accounts, we know this is the time of the year when all of your hard work is rewarded. It's kind of like a shepherd's equivalent of the harvest time. It's a time of feasting, a time of drinking, a time of partying. It's a time when all the sheep herders would get together and they would gather their wool and notice how rich and abundant and wealthy they were. Money flows freely. And since David has been providing protection for Nabal's shepherds, he sends some messengers to see if they could also share in the feasting. David's messengers arrive and they say to Nabal, "We hear it's sheep shearing time, and when your shepherds were out in the wilderness with the sheep, we never took advantage of them a single time. They never lost even one little bitty sheep. And we were hoping now you'll return the kindness by being generous to us." Nabal's shepherds even vouched for David. They reported, "It's true, we were treated very, very well. Nobody took anything from us. Nobody took advantage of us. Actually, it was like David and his men formed a wall around us, protecting us the entire time that we were out in the wilderness with the sheep." Now, you would think that since David performs this act of service, that Nabal would be happy to provide a small payment of food and supplies for David's starving army. But you'd be wrong. Remember, Nabal is described as crude and mean. And in keeping with that description, he responds to the messengers of David by saying, "Who's this David? The country's already full of runaway servants. Do you think I'm going to take good bread and good wine and the meat from freshly butchered sheep that I've prepared for the workers at my house and give it to people I've never even seen, I've never laid eyes on? I don't know where they've come from." When the messengers return to the camp empty-handed and they report to David everything that was said to them, David is incensed. The insult is too much even for a man after God's own heart, and his reply is simply, "Get your swords." 400 men grab their swords and they start to make their way south to Nabal's home. David is beyond angry, and you know that because nobody puts a sword on just to have a conversation. David feels disrespected, and he's going to go get more than that pound of flesh from this grouchy old tightwad. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, a servant goes and tells Nabal's wife, a woman named Abigail, what her grumpy, no-good husband has done. She comes into the story kind of like a triage nurse, on the battlefield. She's immediately assessing damages and treating wounds. And what she does is she gathers up enough food to feed a large army. We're told that she gets 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep butchered, ready to cook, a bushel of roasted grain, 100 raisin cakes, 200 fig cakes. It is enough to feed 600 soldiers. And without consulting her husband, she just heads out to meet David. One brave, wise, unarmed woman heading towards 400 warriors. Abigail is able to meet the force of David's anger with soft answers, and she turns away his wrath. She explains, my husband's just living up to his name. After all, his name means fool. She begs David for mercy, and David changes his mind. His attitude goes from rage to worship. He turns his army around, and he says that he's going to allow God to be the one to distribute justice. The next morning, when Nabal sobers up a little bit, Abigail tells him how she saved his selfish hide, and we discover that at that very moment, he has a heart attack or a stroke, but he falls into a coma, and 10 days later he dies. Nabal is definitely one of the least likable characters in the entire Bible. Maybe that's why we meet a lot of folks named Peter or James, Mary, or even Abigail, but you've probably never met anyone named Nabal. And while I wouldn't have named one of my kids Nabal or Judas or Jezebel, that doesn't mean that we don't embrace our own surliness from time to time. I remember when I was working at Sears, the movie Grumpy Old Men came out, and there was an older guy that I worked with who said, finally, a movie I can relate to. He's not alone. But we don't have to be grumpy old men or women. Not everyone living in Nabal's home is a bitter brother or a sour sister. Abigail seems to have a better understanding about our text for today. So let's go back and look at Philippians 4:8 one more time. There we read, summing it all up, friends, I'd say you do best by filling your minds and meditating on things true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Nabal, he's created this huge mess by repaying David's kindness with humiliation. You got 400 warriors marching through the wilderness towards Nabal's home to exact revenge. As you can imagine, it's a tense situation. Everything looks bleak. But what we discover is in the midst of all of this mess and stress, Abigail is experiencing God's peace, which surpasses all understanding. It's my belief that she's able to find peace because she's made the choice to focus her mind and to live inside the boundary of whatever is lovable, beautiful, and admirable. There's no doubt she's living in a bad situation. Her home life is not ideal, and yet she makes the choice to go farther than just looking for the silver lining in the cloud. She's looking for beauty. And I believe that when we intentionally meditate on things that are lovely and beautiful, we're also able to live in the peace of God that surpasses all understanding as well. I can remember a few years ago, I had to go to Birmingham to visit a friend of mine who was really sick. Honestly, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see them in pain, but I knew this might be my last opportunity to be with him and to talk with him. And I knew that I wasn't going for me. I was going for my friend and for his wife. On the way down there, traffic was horrible. I had trouble finding a parking spot at UAB. I was running late. I missed lunch. And as you can imagine, I was frustrated. But as I was walking down Fifth Avenue towards the hospital, I saw a guy. He pulled his hand out of his pocket. And when he did, some money fell on the ground. A lady walking by the other way tapped him on the shoulder and alerted him to the money. And when he turns around and picked up the money, he noticed a guy sitting against a building with a cup. And without saying anything, the guy just smiled, picked up the money that fell out of his pocket, walked over and put it in the guy's cup. And I don't know what it was, but at that moment, everything and my life changed. My attitude changed. That act of beauty changed my mindset. It happened over a decade ago, and I still remember the beauty of that act. When Paul says that we're to think and to meditate inside the boundary of whatever is beautiful or lovely, he's not talking about good looks or physical attractiveness. Paul is referring to people and things that inspire us to be like Christ, to be people who are pleasing and agreeable. It's kind of like I used to feel when I would walk into my parents' home and I could smell those warm cookies in the oven. Abigail not only focused on what was beautiful, she lived her life in such a way that she caused David to think about what was lovely as well. I mean, it happens all the time. I'm not sure who scribbled the bit of graffiti on the MARTA in Atlanta, but I would really love to meet them and to thank them for the reminder. Because there I was in a car full of people in black Sharpie written over some lawyer's advertisement. Somebody wrote, "I might forget what you say, but I will never forget how you made me feel." When we live inside the boundary of whatever is lovely, we discover that we not only have the freedom to experience peace, we have the space to share that peace and warmth with others as well. Unless you're a hermit, you don't live in a vacuum. What you meditate on has a dramatic impact on your personal relationships. So for a moment, ask yourself, how do you make people feel? When they walk away from an interaction with you, what new emotions is that person feeling? Do your actions and words inspire confidence or insecurity? Peace or anger? Joy or despair? To take this a little farther, what do you think would happen if we began to focus on living our lives of attractive goodness and attractive speech? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." And salt and light are good things, pleasant things, things that make life on earth better, more enjoyable. Bitterness, blandness, darkness, all of those things are dispelled by salt and light. And one of our God-given roles in the church is to make the world a much more enjoyable place. What I'm actually suggesting here is that one of the most important yet overlooked methods of evangelism is nothing more than creating a space where others can also see beautiful things. Even if they don't believe the message when we preach it or teach it or tell it, the truth is that maybe people are just not willing to listen to what we say about Jesus, but they can't escape the way we make them feel when we're living like Jesus. Maybe the greatest thing that you can do in the kingdom of God is to live your life in such a way that somebody who is near you will long to see the beauty that you see. Now, I probably need to put a pin in here for a moment because I imagine right about now there's somebody watching who's thinking, "Jeremy, we have to do more than just be nice. Somebody has to have the courage to call them like they see them. Somebody has to take on the role of calling out sin." Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I never said that paying attention to how we make people feel and telling them the truth is mutually exclusive. But I also don't believe that we got to be gruff or mean or surly for people to know where we stand. You don't have to be a Nabal to make your point. In fact, I think unless you and I pay attention to the attractive goodness in the way that we speak and in the way that we act, we will find ourselves acting just like our culture. And you and I weren't saved from our sin just so that we could continue to live in our sin. We were saved so that we could stand out in the culture like a star shining in the nighttime sky. The world is not going to be attracted to Christ if the church lives like the world. And if they're not going to be attracted to Christ, they will never change to be like Him. And when we meditate on things that are beautiful and lovely, we not only stand out from the culture, we actually have this amazing ability to influence and to persuade our community for Christ. When we live like Jesus, We live our changed lives out in the public. There's no such thing as a secret disciple or a secret agent Christian. We've been saved by the blood of Christ, and we are called to live like light, like stars in the nighttime sky. And when we shine like lights, we need to make sure that we are using our light to point people to Jesus. Because there are times when light is harsh, that it causes us to recoil. When you've gotten used to living in the dark and somebody shines a bright light in your face, it's not a pleasant experience. It actually hurts. That's why we're told to shine our light in the world in such a way that we make people long to be with Jesus. We want people to understand that there is grace available to everyone, even them. Which is why I think we need to follow Abigail's example and make sure that we're not only thinking about things that are lovely, but we are living in such a way that we are causing other people to meditate on what is beautiful and lovely as well. You see, because Abigail is able to meditate on what's beautiful, she's able to keep David from doing something he would regret later. Instead, Abigail points to the beauty of David's future. When she approaches David and she says, David, God is up to something great in you. God has a plan for your life. And in his plan, you don't fight your battles, you fight the battles of God. David, I need you to see the beauty in the fact that you're not a wrongdoer. You're a good man. And you have this lovely, beautiful future if you'll just take the moment to consider it. And because she's able to think about what's lovely, she's able to get David to think about it and to see it as well. When people refuse to meditate on things that are beautiful and lovely, they're like David in the beginning of the story who's filled with anger and headed down to get their own style of justice. Instead of us meditating on all the ways that God has blessed us, we become over-focused on all the ways that we've been mistreated, and our thoughts are consumed with all of the things that are being kept from us, how somebody is holding us back, how mistreated we are. But when you and I are being called to this higher level of thinking, and we hear the call and we accept the call, and we begin to meditate and think on things that are lovely. When we meet at the table today, we get to go there and to remind one another what is truly lovable. We gather and take the bread and the cup because Jesus already provided us everything that we need to live a beautiful life. So today, are you meditating on Jesus? Or are you living a beautiful life based on your understanding of the grace of God? Because if you're not, at the table today, you need to take advantage of the opportunity you are being offered to change the way you think, change the way that you live. We get to go to the table and meet with Jesus, who leads us into a true relationship with God and who invites us to live inside the boundary and experience the wonderful freedom of focusing on whatever is lovely.